We have a great panel that will be discussing the growth and challenges of DeFi. There was a little bit of a debate about how to pronounce it. Is it DeFi or DeFi? But I'm going to leave it to the panelists to decide on this. The panel will be led by George Sebastião. George is the CEO of Global Blockchain Organization. He's also a CTO advisor, speaker, and board member. He has a lot of experience in blockchain, asset tokenization, cybersecurity, AI, IoT, 5G, cloud computing, disaster recovery, big data, and managed services. George is a professional advisor in several innovative startups using disruptive technology with focus on generating business value and enabling sustainability. He created the powerful framework A6 of security, assess, apply, administer, awareness, and agility. George is a regular speaker at international conferences, and he's also the author of a book called La face cachée du crédit.
My first job is to say good afternoon. My second job is to welcome you all. I think it's probably the fourth or fifth event we have done together with Hadi. It has been a long road, and it's been very good in terms of establishing the right connections. My name is Jorge Sebastião. I'm a Portuguese origin, but Portuguese-Canadian, but I've been in the Middle East for about 25 years, so I qualify almost as a local, but I still, although I can apply probably for the passport in Bahrain. Since today the topic is blockchain and more specific DeFi, before I even get into that, I have to do actually one quick housekeeping thing. I know yesterday we had a reception here, and today we want to continue on the same mood, so we'll have a reception as well at the Conrad Hotel from 8 o'clock until midnight at VI. So you're all invited, and it's free of charge. First drink is on the house, and 20% from there on. So it's primarily a business networking event, and we'll continue the topics that we're discussing here. What is the important topic that we're covering today is something we call DeFi. As you know, blockchain has gone through a tremendous amount of evolution over the last, I guess it's almost 11, 12 years. 6 out of it, when Ethereum got introduced. And with the advent of Ethereum, we started creating a new version of what we call blockchain, which allowed us to write and read and execute contracts on the cloud of blockchain. And these smart contracts is really the power that has enabled the technology that we're going to be introducing in a few minutes. So let me also introduce the people that are going to be with me today. One of them is missing there, but we'll introduce him as well. First one is Andreas Tsindos. Andreas Tsindos is a longtime colleague for a little bit more than 5 years. We get to play squash from time to time, or at least break a few glasses in between. I mean, I'm talking glasses. So we both also live not only in the Middle East, but in Limassol, Cyprus. So Andreas is with us today. Andreas is an amazing guy because he does a lot of things that are required in blockchain. One of them I consider extremely important, which I call blockchain interoperability. So everybody's building their own blockchain, but how we get them to talk together is an important thing. So Andreas also does things called magic payments that does the integration across various wallets as well. Then we have Damu Wiston, which I met, I think, almost 2 years ago. Damu is from the US. So I did spend half of my life in the US and Canada, so welcome. You guys are getting an election very soon. So I wish you all the best. Damu is also a famous author of a book on blockchain, something like Don't Trust Me. I don't trust you. Okay, don't trust me. So same sentence, it's a variation, but it's a book that I recommend you look at Amazon.com. And it is good to sometimes have different perspectives on blockchain. Actually, one of my favorite books in blockchain, apart from Damu's book, is also the one that was written by Don Tapscott and Alex, both father and son. I've worked with both. I met Don almost 35 years ago in Ottawa when I was at the time in Canada Post. He has written a book called Paradigm Shift, and he wrote the book called Business of Blockchain. It's about 750 pages. It's in probably its third edition. Then we have Irina Iver. I was going to say Irina something else, but I will probably get shut down. Irina is our famous lawyer in the audience. I know Irina probably for almost 7 years, give or take. Lawyer is important because if you're doing blockchain, you're doing contracts, you have smart, not so smart contracts, but you need to have something that ties things down, especially when we talk about secure token offerings and asset tokenization, be it titles, real estate, gold, silver, etc. So Irina is quite important in that. And there's one fourth person that is not on there as pictures, but he is as important because we have done a couple of shows together and a couple of interviews in the past. His name is Jason King. Jason King is a famous local resource in the area of blockchain. He's got also an ongoing DeFi project, so he's going to give us a perspective of what DeFi is actually in the real world. So this is actually quite important so that we're not just talking in theory, we're also talking in practice as well. Before we get to the panel, I prepared, I think, something like 10 slides just to situate the panel a little bit. So I call it DeFi Innovation and Challenges. Why is this important? Because I think DeFi is about to introduce a major new wave of revolution. But one of the problems every time we had a revolution in IT is we have this feeling that we have a replay of what we just did before. I don't know if many of you have watched a movie called Groundhog Day. I invite you to look at this famous movie, which kind of is a repeat. So everybody keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So what do we really mean by DeFi? DeFi stands for distributed finance. I don't know where the E comes from because distributed for me comes with an I, but distributed finance. Decentralized finance, okay, distributed. Why is this important? Because today DeFi has got a market cap of about $16 billion. This is something that only started somewhere 2.5 years ago, give or take, maybe even a little bit less. So these are the top 10, well, the one got cut because of the screen, but we have things like Compound AI at 1 billion and so on. But one of the ones that has made certainly the most noise is Uniswap, which is now reached a little bit over 2 billion. And this is the curve of what Uniswap has done just in the last 3 months. So if you invested, let's say, 10 cents or 25 cents a few months ago, you'd probably be retiring right now. So just to give you an idea of the variation. But of course, there is, like everything that goes up, comes down. I usually call this the Burj Khalifa sentiment. So the curve goes extremely high, but then it comes down on the other side of the building. So DeFi has basically doubled in a very short period of time. But DeFi has got many issues. One of them is obviously cybersecurity. My slide originally said 25 million, but it's 25 plus 15. The 15 is just yesterday got lost by hackers. So it's four acts and counting, major acts. There's a lot of minor ones we don't talk about. This is our famous creator of Ethereum, Vitalik from Canada, and I agree 100% with him. Smart contracts is about code. In a typical amount of code, for every 1,000 lines of code, we have a vulnerability or a bug. And for every 10,000 lines of code, we have a critical vulnerability. It means something that can seriously affect. So I think smart contracts are probably the Achilles heel of DeFi, and I'll ask my panelists what they think really about that. So what happens when DeFi does good and then it goes bad? So if you see the graph a little bit beyond Irina and Damu, you'll see it goes up, it kind of floats where it's supposed to, and then there's a collapse down to zero. So this is an example of a recent DeFi token that had a major critical vulnerability in the contract code. Other things have to do with shutdowns because DeFi, most of them are ERC20, which is based on the Ethereum platform, although there is now DeFi also based on EOS and other platforms, but they're still not as mature, and I'll get to that in a second. So if the Ethereum price goes down or up, so if it goes up, what we call the gas fees become exorbitant. So that means doing transactions in DeFi become non-profitable because it's about the transactions that matter. Other things that I think will matter major in the disruption of DeFi is that we're about to introduce Ethereum 2.0, which instead of using proof of work is going to transfer to proof of stake as a way the whole blockchain actually works. DeFi also is not everything is on the DeFi cloud, which means the blockchain cloud. Some of it stays outside of the DeFi cloud. In this case, this particular protocol of DeFi was also running on the Google cloud, but the product was so successful that although they increased the database by 50% headroom, they kept filling up the database. So that means the DeFi project kept on crashing because it could not keep up with growing demand. So sometimes growing or not being able to service your customers is probably your worstest problem. So DeFi is also based on a stack of protocols. So if you have vulnerability or deficiencies and elements of the stack, it's like a house of cards. So it's like building a house, but instead of being on cement, is on kind of sand, so it can easily collapse as a result. So we want the options on that. So the question is, what is your appetite for risk? Of course, you can make money, but are you willing to risk what you put in? And this is all about disrupting of the financial industry. So let's start maybe here with Andreas. And Andreas, I would like your opinion on how you see DeFi as we move forward.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, George. So I've come into the space of blockchain from a technology perspective. So I never really got into the crypto. But what's happened now with the DeFi is that we have the financial engineering tools to be able to actually allow everybody and disintermediate the existing financial systems. And for me, that's what is really interesting with the DeFi kind of concept and projects. So this is what for me is really, the most interesting part for DeFi.
Damu, you were talking about trust. What's your opinion on the trust side?
That's a good question. First of all, just to put things in perspective, in the region, I was one of the first people to work on a cross-border payment solution on blockchain back in 2017 out of Kuwait. So that's kind of why I really got involved in the whole blockchain space. I created something called FinTeachable, and so we work with all the banks. So right now, I teach every single bank here in the UAE. And one of the biggest concerns that every single bank has right now that are thinking about blockchain is really around something called, again, decentralized finance, because it, in essence, is eliminating them as the broker, right? And that's a major piece. Why smart contracts are so important is because those are the digital contracts that we're using without having to use a bank as an intermediary or a broker. And so, as you alluded to earlier, the biggest challenge we face with these digital contracts is the trust in those contracts, right? Or could those contracts be vulnerable? And as you said, rightfully so, after 10,000 lines of code, you typically have at least one major defect, right? And we all know, just like the vaccine, for example, whenever you roll any new product out, any new product, your first iterations of it are going to have some major flaws. I've never heard of any project in the entire world in which the first version that went out is the version that they're using a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, right? The only thing that we can actually see that in is maybe Bitcoin, maybe, and even that has had its evolution. So point is, trust in these contracts is really everything, and without that trust, as you saw with one of your charts, you have this huge spike. We call it the Gartner hype cycle, where you have these, with any emerging technology, initially that's getting momentum. As you get mass adoption, it spikes up, and then eventually the bubble bursts, right? And in this case, once you lose trust in that smart contract, then guess what? That whole protocol is completely ruined.
Next topic, what I think is very important here. We went through the famous waves of ICO, IEO, then we went to STO, and KYC became extremely important, and regulatory approach, whether it's sandbox or full regulation. And all of a sudden, we have DeFi. No LinkedIn profiles, no passports, no IDs, and people are putting millions, if not billions of dollars. So Irina, what's your take on this one?
Oh, I'm loving it. I'm loving it so much, and already counting the subpoenas and the cases that will be issued in the nearest future.
You're going to arrest the code?
What? Well, when the ICO craze happened, I think we all remember 2017, right? From about what? January till December, when it all crashed in a spectacular manner. When the ICO craze started, every ICO founder claimed on every corner that, from every high building, that they are absolutely not breaching any financial regulations, because no regulations apply to us because we are on so-called blockchain. It took what, about 2 years for regulators to catch up and start issuing subpoenas. We have, famous, amazing cases. Nobody went to prison, unfortunately. I'm waiting for Ripple guys to go to prison.
No, some went to prison.
Some did?
Oh, yes, quite a few.
Okay. So what we have now is decentralized finance. The idea, the libertarian idea, is amazing. Let's disrupt the current financial system, which makes very little sense for ordinary folks on the street. It makes a lot of sense for 1% of the bankers that are, creaming it from the top, but it makes very little sense for a common ordinary folk on the street. Billions are still unbanked. Did you know that in the MENA region, only 14% of the population is banked? Only 14. You and I have bank accounts and credit cards. We are one of those very few people who have that. So the idea of decentralized finance is amazing. It's libertarian. We outside of the system. No system applies to us because everything is on the blockchain. Everything is automated. Everything is run by smart contract, decentralized, autonomous teams. But I mean, the reality is, what do we have? We have scams. We have the ICO like pump and dumps. We have head chef of Sushi Protocol. What is he calling himself?
Sushi Swap.
Sushi Swap, right? He's dumping his tokens. So what do we have? How long will this continue? Will that take regulators another 2 years to catch up and actually start finding those people, even though that they don't have LinkedIn profile, even though they're operating in the shadows? I think we are lying to ourselves, or I think we're being delusional, thinking that we can somehow stay outside of the financial system just because of the existing financial regulations, just because we're on a blockchain. The regulator would not accept that. The enforcers will not accept that, and eventually, some of the projects, they are lending, they are conducting other financial regulated activity, and if they're doing it so outside of the current regulations, that they're breaking the law. There's nothing you can do about it. It is the fact.
Let's look at the example. Many of you have heard about something called eggs, H-E-X, eggs. Eggs is a product also of DeFi. If you happen to be in London recently, you would see splattered on the 2-decker buses in London, you can make 1,000% in 4 weeks. Who's checking this? I mean, have you ever heard of 1,000% in 4 weeks as a return? And no shame whatsoever in advertising this on the double-decker bus. For those that want, I'm happy to send you a copy of this picture. So something is wrong somewhere. I had the chance to meet Jason when we were doing a panel together with Primot some time back, called about quantum supremacy. I still remember that day because I was running between 3 events on the same day. But Jason is an amazing guy because he brings us innovation. So he has got actually his own DeFi project called Tautorino. Maybe I probably misspelled it completely wrong. But guess what? I donated some ethers for his projects just to make sure I provide some moral support. So Jason, tell us a little bit about your project.
So I've been, doing crypto for a while and looking at actually how it got me interested in DeFi was about maybe the beginning of last year. I had a friend of mine. He's what's called I think he was the early investor in Factom, created a lot of the early protocols in the blockchain, and he showed me hey, I got this project. It's called PegNet, and we're aiming to do basically DeFi foundation trading. And since then, the project, bootstrapped from the ground, it has done over, I think, probably about $4.5 billion in derivative trading to date, completely decentralized. And that caught my eye, seeing like, what is this? And then you start seeing the rise of compound. You're seeing the rise of synthetics. A lot of these platforms are basically creating a alternative market in addition to the existing market. So looking at the space of DeFi, you see one of the biggest what's it called? Sectors that you're seeing growing is the borrowing and lending, right? Like that's the most common financial activity to do in the financial industry is lending and borrowing. If I can borrow at 10% and lend it out at 20%, I'm making money. So a lot of these protocols started basically, taking in collateralized, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and started, borrowing out to people who are seeking to leverage. And they're happy to pay a 20% yield when you have, projects that are giving if I can borrow at 20%, but I'm making 200%, then yes, like people take that risk. So that kind of what initially started the whole borrowing and lending. And borrowing and lending in crypto is not new. It's actually started many years ago. And then from that, I think the DEXs, decentralized exchanges, particularly with Uniswap. Uniswap actually wasn't the first one to introduce the business model. It was actually Bancor. If anybody remember that, back in 2016, the guys raised $200+ million in one of the largest ICOs at the time. And so a lot of innovations actually today of DeFi is actually coming from a lot of the concepts and the early pioneers who've been building for the last 5-6 years. So it's not something that it's just kind of like taken off because of a lot of people began finding ways, I can leverage my existing crypto assets to create new markets. So looking at the market, there's one sector that's missing, and even last few years, we've seen the rise of stablecoins. So for those of you who don't know, stablecoins is basically a crypto asset that is tied to the dollar, pegged to the price of gold, or backed by equity, commodities, anything that you name it. So these are what we call asset-backed stablecoins. And the issue about cryptocurrency, if you look at, for example, price of Bitcoin, price of Ethereum, what determines the price of such asset? And it's more of a pure supply and demand and market price discovery. And stable coins, and if you look at the evolution of the first stable coin, the most prominent one's USDT Tether. So Tether actually started back in 2013, 14. Some of the crypto guys had an idea. They're like, this whole banking is giving us problems. Like moving money in and outside of the banking system is extremely difficult. We need to build something new. So very simply, go open up a bank account, put in $400,000 in cash, create a token, and basically become like a decentralized bank. So basically, they started getting the exchanges. I think later Bitfinex purchased Tether, and that was a really good strategic move because then they started getting every single exchange on the planet, especially since China banned banned crypto. All the exchanges started moving on to USD Tether, and that's really what kind of brought the volume and the liquidity necessary. And then, so the goal, looking at this whole space, wanted to create a new asset empowered by the DeFi, similar to Crypto 1.0 with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Essentially, we had a pretty crazy goal. It was to create the most expensive crypto ever made, and currently it's. If you look at the actual price, it's about the fifth most expensive crypto already, and we're still not even finished with private sale. And the goal is to build basically a Berkshire Hathaway A-share of crypto DeFi, and there's a lot of cool business model there. But we've seen pretty good market validation. We haven't really done any marketing, just basically grassroots.
Stealth marketing.
Stealth marketing.
Okay, so
yeah.
There's an important word that Jason brought. The word was virtual bank, or neobank sometimes it's called. That's the bank without bricks and mortar. That means it's a bank that exists purely on the blockchain or on the cloud. But even if something exists on the cloud, it has to deal with real world problems. One example would probably be something like Revolut or Bitwala. Revolut is in UK. Bitwala is in Germany with Solaris Bank. But they need pipes under the covers to actually support or integrate with the existing financial system. So one of the best persons for these pipes is Andreas. So Andreas, tell us a little bit about the importance of these pipes.
Yes, so I'm kind of sitting on kind of the fiat world and the crypto world in terms of the technology. So the Magic Payments platform that we developed is basically a SWIFT for mobile wallets, but this is real fiat regulated wallets. So there's always been this issue of how do you bring that bridge between the crypto world and the real world. And this is where it's been very, very difficult. Now, with DeFi, you could get round this. So if you're using the existing rails and the pipes, as George mentioned, you can actually develop those decentralized financial models to actually cater and somehow build into the existing regulatory space, and this is Rina can kind of build more on that, to kind of get around those concerns. So I think this is what was going to be very interesting in the next kind of evolution of the DeFi projects, how they can actually marry those two worlds together. Because I think, as Jason said, most of these projects have come from the old ICO models and the ICO projects, but these are all the projects that have actually survived. In the initial days, all ICO projects that were scams are pretty much finished. So those existing projects that did raise a lot of money at the time because they could, but they've been spending them over the last 4 or 5 years to actually develop some cool products which enable this decentralized finance to be built. So those projects are now becoming mature and actually can leverage themselves on top of the existing financial system. So if we can get that right, I think we'll build credibility within the DeFi world. And this is why I think there's such interest now, because people are seeing the potential of, actually, this might work. You know, we could potentially get regulators and get the existing financial systems to actually take us seriously. And I think that's what it's going to be interesting. So, you know, not to try and completely disintermediate the existing pipe work, because it's not realistic right now. We're talking about 15 billion or 16 billion compared to, you know, the trillions of the economy. So there's a long way to go. So we have to, you know, marry those two worlds somehow and get the acceptance of the existing system.
So, Damu, how do we build trust in DeFi? Or we don't trust it?
No.
Trust
no.
me.
No, so
Don't trust me.
you know, trust is such a very complex concept, right? It's not as simple as like binary, like machines or ones and zero. So I'm just trying to, you know, as my mentor would say, pontificate. I'm trying to think through that question on different levels. One, from a regulatory perspective, I do feel like, you know, we don't need regulations. We don't. And the reason I say that is the difference between traditional fiat is that it's traditionally based on a regional or a geo-position location. Whereas anything dealing with blockchain or the internet is everywhere.
The world is flat.
Well, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. We can talk about Merkle trees in space and stuff like that. It's a whole different conversation. But the point, but again, the real point there is that I do believe that, you know, the role of regulators is to provide some level of protection, right? And you look at, like in the U.S., for example, President Trump has been on record saying that the president has been the most at removing regulations, right? That's been one of his big pushes. And on one end, you can see how that is challenging. And on the other end, you could see that what you're doing is you're putting the onus back on the businesses. And so if the businesses fail, then they should not be saved. They should just fail, right? But when we talk about, you know, a DAX or DEX, which is decentralized exchange. The idea behind this, again, decentralized, not central to one particular owner, right? The community, meaning the network, everyone that's involved in that community represents they have tokens in it. They have not necessarily equity in it, but they have usage in it, utility in it.
So it's like decentralized capitalism.
Yes, absolutely. And so the question becomes, can we build trust in the community that supports us? Or there is no or. Yes, we can. And the other piece of it is the only way we lose that trust is if there's a breach of trust.
Okay. So Irina, how do we unregulate or regulate this? Or can we actually live with zero regulations like Damu said?
I'm all for deregulating as much as we can, as much as the powers that that have over us allow that to happen. Unfortunately, I don't believe that it will happen because, imagine you're a regulator, you having a very cushy job, you have a very cushy salary, you're receiving very cushy fees for the licensing you're issuing. Look at the banking cartel, right?
Yeah.
They have a banking license which basically allows them to money launder dirty money from all over the world. Have you read it? Have you seen the FinCEN papers? 2 trillion?
2 trillion. In 1 year.
Money laundered 2 trillion by these amazing banking institutions that we have that are licensed and regulated and have 600 audited and 600 compliance professionals are sitting and making sure that everyone is compliant. So for me, this license is just a license to money launder, right? So that's why I call them the banking cartel. Everybody else does that. So I'm all for deregulation. I'm all for self-governance. I'm all for the libertarian approach. I'm all for anarchy, but in a good sense of it. Not let's burn down the building, but let's govern ourselves. That's the meaning of anarchy. It's not what's happening in the US at the moment, unfortunately. So, but will we be allowed to do that? I'm afraid we will not get there because, the bankers have to do their money laundering and get their amazing fees for that. The regulators need their cushy salaries, etc., etc. So what do you do? You exist in parallel. So of course, the Bitcoin community is out there. We are growing in numbers, existing in parallel with the legacy financial institutions. Of course, people still make fun of us, saying that Bitcoin is being used by criminals, etc., etc. But I don't know. Maybe by the time it gets to our great-grandchildren, we'll be somewhere closer to that ideal. Although with what's happening now, 2 months ago, we were not allowed to leave the house to go grocery shopping. So are you talking about conducting financial operations or banking operations without a license? You had to apply online to go buy bread. I think, unfortunately, our liberties and our freedoms are just going to be taking more and more away from us in every aspect of our life. So just let's move to an island and live as a community. I don't know.
I think one thing that is very unique to DeFi is that we have a young population of innovators that are disrupting the traditional system. Jason is one of these guys. So Jason, if we invest in your project, can we retire in the next 2 weeks?
It's not an investment. So actually how we position everything in DeFi is there's a term, if you probably hear it more often over the next months, it's called degens, crypto degenerates. These are guys who will come, it's like people who go to casino, they'll play the slot machine, they'll play the poker games. So the way we actually position everything, it's actually entertainment. So it's not really an investment.
Welcome to entertainment banking.
Yes.
So we have a new casino in town. So instead of playing in the traditional banking casino, now we play in the virtual casino. So
I'll give a little thoughts about because since we brought up some interesting topics about regulation and I've seen this space grow from something that regulators, banks, governments, many people really didn't pay attention to crypto until it kind of eventually became more mainstream and more, governments and banks started paying attention to it and attempting to regulate. So I'll give a little thoughts about regulation. So if we look at, for example, the SEC, okay, this is a classic example of what I call the insider trading. So if you guys remember a few years ago, there was a famous lawyer, I forgot his name, but he was the guy who basically wrote the bit license regulation in New York. And I was there in the room, and he bluntly told the whole world, when I retire from this position, I will not do anything related to the regulation I just wrote. Okay? He told that to everyone. What happens 6 to 8 months later? Look at what he's doing now for the last few years. So for me, it's a joke. If you're going to tell people, yeah, I'm going to write those rules, and I'm not going to, conflict of interest, I'm not going to get involved in it, and later you open up a consulting firm servicing businesses and companies to get the very license that you regulate, to me that's a joke. That's like the SEC. They claim to, don't want to say anything bad about the SEC, they're great men and women there doing their job, but what is it really they're doing? Are they really protecting the innocent investors from investing into these sophisticated, profitable investment opportunity that are only available to the few elite investors, accredited investors? Or are they just building the moat around the castle and not letting the normal investors get crap return yields on saving products and checking accounts, and some people go negatives, and they can take their risk in the public retail market. Of course, go buy the stock. Central bank is printing money and buying up everything. What is the market? Where's the fundamentals? DeFi, in my opinion, and from another perspective, of course, there are a lot of crazy things happening, but in the core essence, it's about the return of true capitalism. And like what Damu mentioned about trust and about, it's a self-regulated community. And guess what? People will come and put money in your thing. And if you continue to build that trust, it's like doing any good business. If you do good business comes. If you're going to scam people out of easily, throw up something, raise like $10 million and retire. But there's so much money to be made in there. Why would you even quit when there's so much potential there? It'll be a waste. So that's why, for me, it's about continuously building, and because there's just so much value that I see in there, and it's true capitalism. There's no regulator saying, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, because guess what? They're not here to protect you. They're not here to protect your interest. So this whole regulation, until the regulators themselves can become trusted, I think it's pointless to say, look at banks. They're supposed to, why is it that every time the regulators come and do their jobs after something bad happens? Look at, I think there was something here in Dubai even a few years ago, some big private equity firm. Well, we didn't know there was a huge scam going on all this time. It just, why do they only do their job when the fire happens? You're supposed to prevent, your job is to prevent these things from happening.
They tell you that it's their job. Their job is not to protect investors. Their job is to protect the establishment. Yeah. So the establishment continues doing what is.
Did everybody hear about Wirecard? Wirecard offices were here in Dubai, not very far from where we're sitting today.
Exactly.
What was the amount for Wirecard?
3 billion.
3 billion.
They.
Who was the scapegoat? The poor CEO. Everybody else got home free.
And
by the way,
Ernst & Young audited them every year.
Every year, but they didn't bother to check the bank account. I'm a bit puzzled here. The print. We'll take your. We trust your bank account. The money is there. Actually, one other important thing. We heard already a few keywords important: tokens, DEX, distributed exchanges, ERC20. But there's one new. Every time we introduce a new technology, we have a whole bunch of terms, and you need to understand these terms. A new term. Anybody here in agriculture? Farming. This is the new keyword of DeFi. So if you want to get into DeFi, you better learn what is yarn and farming. So who wants to take on farming?
I'll start.
Okay, Damu, farming.
Yeah, so we call it yield farming. Yield. So in other words, you have compound finance, which I think you talked about earlier today. What they do, which is, how about this? What we used to see a lot in the whole finance space is that you would have to put up your own collateral, as Jason said earlier. So you put up your own crypto, and then you would get kind of a credit that you could then use somewhere else, right? And so you
liquidity, basically.
Correct, but at the end of the day, you always had collateral. Whereas I'm glad you brought that up. what we see right now in the U.S. is a great example. As of March 24th of 2020, this year, there's something called financial reserve requirements. You can quote this. Financial reserve requirements that banks, financial institutions,
20%.
10%.
Well,
It was 10% in the U.S.
okay. Here
So
it's 20.
as of March 24th of this year, it has been removed by the feds completely.
It's like taking a mortgage without down payment.
So let that sit in now. That now banks in the U.S. have the ability to loan out an infinite amount of money at whatever interest rates, at lowest interest rates ever in history. And there's zero, requirement from the federal government that you have to have collateral in-house to support that loan. Now, in the crypto space, especially compound finance is a great example, where they're saying, you still need to have X amount of, so for a good example is you could put up, $10 worth of Bitcoin as your collateral, and you could now have a, credit that you can then use to go, which would be no more than $10, that you can then use to go and buy, or make your other investments somewhere else. So that's, I guess I'm struggling here because, it sounds like one is a little bit more ethical, thank you, than the other, right?
Fiat is the biggest Ponzi scheme, right?
I will not say that on record.
Photocopy machine.
Yeah, but so yield farming is this idea that, or we call it, liquidity mining? Liquidity mining, and the idea is that by you transferring your collateral, your crypto, there's a mining fee to make this happen, right? And so
But here I see another problem happening. Who's the real people making money on DeFi? One of the terms in crypto we call whales. These are people that have large amounts of specific coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum.
Yeah.
These are the guys bringing in the big money in DeFi anyway. The other guys are making just the crumbs or the leftover crumbs. Jason.
A little bit. So I'll raise an example about how kind of the space works. I mean, we recently did a seed investment into Bella Protocol, which aiming to be the BlackRock of DeFi, building envisioning the future. You have a front end, a centralized front end to access the crazy world DeFi. And one of the innovative things that we did actually was partner up with Binance to create Launchpool as the first product to be offered on Launchpool on Binance. And within probably 3 days, we attracted over $600 million in TVL, total value locked. So that's 600 million real money. Well, if you consider real, like BUSD, BNB, that's pretty liquid in some of the biggest crypto.
So the way I see it is Binance is doing what Facebook did to WhatsApp and Instagram. They looked at something, it was coming up very fast. We better copy, otherwise we will be out of business.
They had to, because Uniswap, see, at one point, I think the peak volume of Uniswap in one day was trading $6 billion.
Bigger than Binance itself. So imagine, we have something that is completely cloud-based or blockchain-based. We have an organization that is kind of bricks and mortar, for lack of a centralized exchange. And the decentralized one overtook it in a matter of...
Yep. And another thing that will happen, interesting thing that you see in DeFi space, a lot of interesting dynamics and things that wasn't possible in a traditional financial market, traditional business sense. Well, if you look at Uniswap, everyone's wondering, hey, when are you going to launch a token? And they were kind of quiet about it. So some guys, I don't know who they are, but they launched SushiSwap. So Chef Nomi, behind one of the pretty big protocols, they basically launched SushiSwap, the same fork. So I basically take yours, I copy it, but I just add tokens to it. And they stole about, the vampire mining was they stole about $600 million overnight from them. Then Uniswap fought back, and they launched their token. And what they did is they airdrop. It's like, I didn't know decentralized exchanges could do, stimulus QE. They airdropped everyone who basically interacted with the Uniswap contract at the time it was about almost $1,200 worth of free tokens. And, and people got their free money. But what's really powerful is that the liquidity providers, basically these are the yield farmers who, provided their money in the beginning. I think one guy got about like 500,000 Uni tokens, and currently it's $5. That's $25 million in money that just kind of happen. But of course, I think a key thing about yield farming is that it allows staking. It takes staking to another level. Similarly, why do we put money inside banks? Why do we put money inside saving products? Because we want to make money on our money, or else why just keep it under my mattress, right? But the current model is about creating new ways of yield. And do I think that some of these yields that are offered in DeFi is sustainable? Absolutely not, because it's not possible to give people like
20%.
No, I'm not talking about 20%. I'm talking about these yield people are offering 1,000,000%, 100,000%, 10,000%. Okay, it makes no sense. But what I believe in a few years, will we be able, like right now on Binance, if you stake BUSD, which is a regulated stablecoin dollar, you get about 20% a year. Which is pretty. If you consider Binance, they're pretty solid. They have good. They're regulated because BUSD is issued by Paxos, New York. So it's relatively stable. And you're getting 20%. Versus
so it's better than a traditional bank account.
Yes, absolutely. So do I believe that in a few years, an average person can take, $1,000 checking account, just keeping their money on Binance or Coinbase. Coinbase, by the way, is also really starting getting into the DeFi thing as well, because they started operating out of Europe.
They forgot about it, but they're coming back.
There's
one point I wanted to cover as well, because one of the things we hear from everybody every day is what's called banking for the unbanked. Help India, help Africa, help Pakistan. So, Andreas, how is DeFi going to help the unbanked?
Right now, probably not very much. However, as I mentioned before, so for me, DeFi is more like a crowd platform for the holders of crypto. So right now, if you're holding X amount of crypto, there's not much you can do with it. But now with this DeFi, you'll be able to use these protocols and tools that they've developed to build value on top of them.
In Dubai, you can buy islands with crypto, you can buy buildings with crypto, you can buy cars with crypto.
Yes, but if you actually look at the mechanics of what they're doing, they're not actually accepting that crypto. You have to take it into real money and pay them the real money. So you're using your tokens, but you have to actually liquidate them to pay them. So we were having this conversation with Jason earlier. So it's not really you're buying something with that crypto itself. So right now, if you're holding loads of crypto, there's not many tools out there to build value and get a rate of return on it. So DeFi allows this to happen, and this is why you mentioned the whales. So, why are the whales going to be making money on this? Because they can actually leverage their existing crypto wallets that have loads of crypto in it to build value on top of it. And then that's built this DeFi ecosystem, and the existing projects in the ICOs that actually, have some real value behind them, get invested by these whales to actually diversify their portfolio. Now, coming back to your question, how will we build financial inclusion and with DeFi? So one of the things that you can do is, the existing wallet systems that we have, and we're trying to build financial inclusion, is that you're allowing them to take the next step away from having cash and being reliant on cash to be able to go digital in terms of a mobile wallet. So you'd be able to allow the value in those wallets to become, being usable, to be able to buy stuff from them. And that's happening now. So take somewhere like Pakistan, there's 250 million people, population roughly, and there's about 70 million wallets. And it's growing exponentially. And then now there's microloans through those vehicles, those tools. So you can, in Kenya, for example, in M-Pesa, you can borrow $20 in the morning, comes into your wallet, you go and buy your goods, you sell them in the market, and you pay back the loan at the same day. So you have this kind of tools available to the unbanked. So where I see DeFi coming in and helping is when enough people transition into those tools and become digital and start using those wallets, okay, it's based on traditional fiat, but then those people will probably get into the DeFi world and actually start, what is a wallet value? Ultimately, it's just a voucher e-money. So that e-money could easily be some sort of crypto-backed money. So you can get people into that. And that's where it brings me back to my question is, why do we need regulators? And, how do we, because people are not responsible with their own money. So the regulators are here supposedly to allow the people to, become responsible and not get scammed and, and things like that. So obviously that's probably not the reality, but this is where we need to somehow think how DeFi can help, or DeFi helped with, social responsibility of the money.
Are we going to see traditional banks buy DeFi projects as well?
Well, traditional banks are already going into crypto right now, right? You look at every bank out there, they're hiring blockchain developers, they're hiring people who can sort of like explain them what a Bitcoin is. I remember back in 2017, 2016, doing the whole, explaining to bankers what Bitcoin is using fingers and sticks, like in kindergarten, and being looked at like I'm the crazy one. So the reason why you cannot just take your Bitcoin and buy shoes for it, it has to be transferred into fiat first, in the background somewhere, without you knowing or not knowing, is because your supply chain is not priced in Bitcoin. Your supply chain is priced in fiat for now. More and more things are being priced now in Bitcoin. For more and more things you can buy for. The more and more things you can buy for Bitcoin, the more and more things, it becomes exponential, right? So
I want to ask a question, since we have the audience here. How many people here are getting their salary or a portion of their salary in Bitcoin in the audience today? 1, 2, 3, oh boy. We're still talking,
and this is
1%.
And this is a blockchain conference, right? Imagine outside of this room there would be 0.0001%. So once your supply chains start getting priced more and more in crypto, then more and more product will be priced in crypto, which is absolutely fine. It's a development. What I don't believe in is that first you get a mobile wallet for fiat, do your KYC and your passport and documentation, because so many people cannot open a bank account because they don't have a passport. So many people
They don't have an address, some of them.
They don't have address. Some people cannot open a bank account because they physically have no shoes to walk into a bank office. Otherwise, they will not be let in. There are communities in Palestine that are not even acknowledged as citizens, and they have no paperwork. They cannot even get access to the banking system. So I think the progress is going to be exactly the opposite. They have a smartphone, they download a Bitcoin wallet, here you go, 30 seconds, you're now banked. And then come and convince me to get back into fiat, and especially if we'll get more and more things priced in crypto. Okay, forget about Bitcoin, maybe it's a little bit too difficult for grandma to understand, but USDT, any stable coin, and stable coin is a part of DeFi. So stable coins, I think, will play a major role in banking the unbanked. I hope so.
But I remember, I come from Canada. I remember in Canada in the early days, we introduced ATMs. Before ATMs, we had this thing called the bank booklet. And the bank booklet is a book that you fold around and used to put on a printer. It went bzz, 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 and kind of printed your bank balance. But guess what was happening in Canada when they introduced the ATMs? The aging population used to say, go to the ATM. Okay, we'll go to the ATM. They did the ATM transaction. They ran back into the bank to update this bzz, bzz booklet because they did not trust the ATM. Now everybody trusts the ATM. So everybody started trusting Bitcoin. So trusting DeFi is not that much down the road.
My grandmother, when she was first given her ATM card, wrote her PIN card on an ATM card and then she was looking at the grandkids, where's the stupid ones? What do you mean? How else would I remember my PIN card, my PIN code? So of course, it's a progress. Today we're struggling with yesterday we struggled what an ICO was, today we're struggling what a DeFi is. I mean, it's a progress. Our kids will laugh at us because they're going to be probably living in some virtual reality world, transferring Bitcoin to each other.
I'm going to give each one of us 2 minutes because Adi is going to soon throw coffee at me. So we'll start with Jason on the right. So 2 minutes about your final words on DeFi, your words of wisdom for our famous audience here.
I just want to bring something that we've found really interesting in the last year. I'm sure I'm very much into trading, and I'm sure those in Wall Street have heard of high frequency trading. I definitely want to show that there's a new concept called flash loans. Essentially, it's basically a single transaction comprised of multiple routing orders. So you're basically in about 15, 20 seconds, you're borrowing money, with zero collateral, so no money down, and some of these, strategies, if you can arbitrage correctly, it brings hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of seconds.
So arbitrage, flash loans. Irina.
Hello. I love the libertarian idea of DeFi. I love the libertarian idea of crypto. I love us thinking that we are somehow outside of the regulatory environment, with our decentralized companies and our decentralized organizations and decentralized exchanges, but I'm afraid the reality is that it's regulators' job to have a job, so they will make sure that they still have the job. So that's my concluding thoughts on DeFi. Do get involved. Do try it out. I don't know how many of you have yams and sushis and other food items. We're gonna start a falafel project. We are recruiting. Who is in? Let us know. Somebody joked yesterday that they prefer tabbouleh. We are up for whatever you want to name it. We are up for it. And then as my last thing I'm gonna say is, Reem, thank you so much. I know you and your team did not sleep to make sure that all of us are in this room. This is the first event since the March lockdown. This is the first time I see so many people in one place. Thank you very much, Reem, and thank you very much to your team. Thank you very much, Hani. This is Hadi. Sorry. This is very great. It's great to be here, and thank you very much for listening to our 5 satoshis worth on DeFi.
Damo.
I don't want to go after her. That was really good.
We trust you.
You should. I think for the rest of our lives, we have to think that we're going to live in a digital world. And so what that means is that information or value now is always going to be real-time, personalized, and through our devices, mobile. That's the first one. The second thing is that we use technology to help us to be more productive, more personalized, and of course, more profitability. And the last one, I want you to always remember this, that you're all awesome. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Andreas, some words of wisdom from Suvla and the country of the cheese that does not melt on the barbecue, for those that know.
Next DeFi project, the DeFi project. So for me, decentralized finance is still very much in its infancy and is for people that have lots of crypto. I don't have lots of crypto. So I look at it from perspective, how can decentralized finance protocols and projects help me to make money? And right now, unless I have lots of crypto or tokens, I find it's too risky. So until that risk factor comes down and gets stabilized, I think for the people like myself, it's going to be quite difficult to get into it. However, what Damo said, the digitalization that we're going through, and this pandemic is proven that it's here to stay. So the more people that get into the digital kind of financial inclusion, whether it's through mobile wallets, and that's a form of going digital, and then getting into that space, by that time the decentralized finance should be mature enough for people to start using it more. And it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years, but I think it will happen because you are getting this financial engineering to the masses without having potentially the banks involved. So we're not going to disintermediate the regulators, I don't think. I think the regulators will be here for a while. They probably have to change themselves. But I think the banks are the ones that are going to be most vulnerable in this space unless they change themselves. So for me, decentralized finance is here to stay because it's built on real projects and it's proven itself now and it's taken off. It's going to be scams. There's always scams when finance is involved. But I think we're going to overcome those. It's not the same number of scams as in the early days of ICOs, I don't see. It's going to happen, but I believe that decentralized finance is here to stay. Once financial inclusion through the digitalization of the ecosystem happens, I think that's where we're going to be really making a difference.
So we have a bit of innovation, a bit of self-regulation, a little bit of trust, a little bit of integration with the old and the new. And my last words of this wisdom are quite simple. I've been in IT for about 35 years. In those 35 years, one thing I learned is that every year I have to throw away 35% of what I learned the year before. So that really means that if you do not innovate, if you do not embrace what's coming your way, you quickly come outdated. So 30% plus a year, so that means in 3 years, there's not much left there. So please read up on DeFi, try it out, experiment, become rich or poor, and learn a little bit in the process. Thank you very much for having us here, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.